Howdy, howdy. Alright, so I put off making this video for as long as possible. Not on purpose. I went through some rough weeks, and also coming right out of the session, I didn't really know what to talk about. So I wanted to give it time to digest like I've done in the past, so that I wouldn't have to make a 0.5 or plus or whatever I ended up calling it. I think it was plus, like I did a few sessions back. And I think the reason why this session felt so awkward to me is because just sometimes, no matter what you do, D&D sessions will feel awkward and like there's something wrong with them, but there really isn't, because my players said they had fun and they reacted like it was a perfectly fine session, but something feels off to me and I couldn't put my finger on it. So let me go over exactly what happened in this session. So the party journeyed from Stout Shadow to the hamlet of Ross, up a mountain path, and halfway thereabout, they encountered some clergymen of the God of Life. They'd previously known that there's a sect within the God of Life that believes that life needs to be tested, that it's not deserved, that you have to go through a trial to figure out whether or not you are truly worthy to live. Jozo roleplayed with these not cultists, but with this sect for a time, and did determine that they were indeed part of that other group, and they were heading down to Stout Shadow because they were looking for a magic item that I forget exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of that will grant us an army, that will allow us to raise an army, that kind of thing. Because they had a divination wizard named Milk Eye that foresaw that such an artifact resided in this particular region. So they were off exploring all these little different nooks and crannies of this area. And next on their list was Stout Shadow. And what Milk Eye foresaw was the Patron of Unlife, which is this magic weapon that the players will no doubt discover in the next session. And so Jozo and his character Thord was like, I can't just let these uber violent sect of the God of Life just waltz into my home and make a mess of things. So he went back to town with them, along with the party's elf Gale. And upon arriving back at town, they were like, alright, well, we need to figure out what this item is and how to keep them away from it. And they didn't figure out what the item was because it was unknown. But the best they could come up with was try and keep them away from the museum, and try and just keep them distracted and waste their time. Of course, while they were off meeting with Gareth, I had one of them go check on the questing board. And they're like, oh, well, here's a quest that says clerics wanted. We should probably check this out because, like, even though they are a sect, they are still legitimately clerics that are involved with the church. So if there's nobody around here that... Oh, hold on. There's noise outside. I'm gonna wait for a second. Okay, cool. I think they're gone. So this sect was like, well, we need to go and look into this because, well, we can't find the weapon, and we'll go where you want to go in just a second. But if you don't have any qualms about it, this seems like a problem that needs solving. So we'd like to check this out. Eventually, we could do it first. We could do it last. It's whatever. And that left it open to the players to try and shut down and dissuade them away from this quest should they feel a need to. They didn't. They went along with it, which I am more than happy with because it means that I do... Bird, what's wrong? You shush. Because it means that I do indeed get to introduce the Patron of Unlife within this dungeon and not just have it be a MacGuffin that I bring out of nowhere later on. And so they started exploring this dungeon. They're down a party member, but they have 3 NPCs. They're not very strong NPCs, but they are capable of healing and a few other buffs and whatnot. I think I didn't feel like doing a lot of prep work. I probably should have given them like a custom spell list, but really all I did was I grabbed the Acolyte. I just made all 3 of them the Acolyte stat block. I'm gonna go take care of the bird. Alright, I realized that sounded a lot more ominous than I meant. I just put a towel over his cage. I didn't kill the bird. But these acolytes with the party, they go down in this dungeon, and initially there's no real encounter. There's not a lot of threat, because this isn't so much like a super dangerous dungeon of a mad mage or anything like that. No, this is just a lab. It's built for function first. So the initial bit was to kind of design the environment. I wanted it to very much feel like, yes, at one point in time this was an orderly place where there was all sorts of research being done, experiments happened, that kind of thing. But now it's been searched through. It's been ruffled and displaced all over the place. And I feel like I did a decent enough job of that. Then they get to the big octagonal room with all of its doors coming off from it. Most of those doors actually lead to living quarters that are not being used currently, because minions have yet to be found, because the lich who was living down here is no longer in any position to go and seek forth minions, but that was initially one of the things that she wanted to do. So anyways, there's a bunch of abandoned rooms. We didn't get into that because in one of the corners of the octagon, there's this shaking amalgam of corpses, and it, I think Jozo, like, his character Thor, scooted like a dagger across the floor to it, made a scraping noise, and so it gets alerted to the party, and it turns and combat ensues, and it was a fun encounter. I like throwing in dashes of body horror and crazy stuff into my encounters. I do tend to just copy paste stat blocks and whatnot from the monster manual. It is legitimately useful, but what I like to do is heavily reflavor and tweak a few things, and this was one of those ones where I heavily reflavored and tweaked it. But it was a fairly fun encounter, and it was pretty dang cool too. Jozo was more or less engulfed by this creature, and Thord cast heat metal on himself so that he would take that fire damage, which he resisted because he was a forge cleric, but the undead would also take that fire damage because he was lodged within its ribcage. So I thought that was a really cool idea, and it went well for them. It would have gone less well for them had they not had 3 clerics there that could have healed Thord up, but it overall went well for them in this particular circumstance. One of the NPCs, Tibra, who was the only one I cared about, died, which on the one hand is a little bit disappointing because he was the other survivor from Sam's village. I don't know if you caught that, but I did drop that name the previous session, Tibra, that he was the other survivor from, I think it was like Green something. Greenford or something like that. I think that's what it was. Was that Tibra and Samuel were the only 2 survivors from that particular small little village. And so now that connection is kind of gone because he's dead. But that same dagger that got scooted across the ground ended up lodged in the enemy's leg, and when the enemy died, Tibra died at almost the exact same moment, and he was in the middle of the portal. And I had that dagger pop out of that enemy's flesh and go inside the portal as well, and it triggered a reaction. So I need to stat out that weapon. I'm not sure if I'm going to turn it into an ego weapon or not. It might just be like a +1 dagger that does like necrotic damage or something like that. That's what I'll be doing later tonight, is statting out that weapon. But I thought it would be cool if a part of Tibra could live on within that dagger. That was just improv. That was not remotely planned. But it's like I'm using the environment. We clearly have this ritual set up, and this shows that the loss of a life combined with a weapon, combined with the magics of this circle, have more or less enchanted this weapon now. And it's just something that would realistically happen should those conditions be met, and that I could do because everything happened to die near that circle. So that was a fun little encounter. I had no problems with that part of the campaign. The only thing that feels a bit sour to me is I kind of feel guilty because I kind of feel like I forced the players to go down that cleric route, especially without their third party member. That feels a little bit dirty to me, but like that's realistically what Steadfast sect that was going and looking for artifacts would do. They would see that, they would check the questing board, and then they'd request that they go there eventually after the rest of the tour was done. That's just something they would do. So like, I feel like I was hand-holding and guiding the party, but at the same time I really wasn't. So I don't know, I feel conflicted there. And then the other part of the party, Marfedalam Kavgum, our dragon folk, played by Dubis. I've discovered that he's a hard player to be left alone. That I have a hard time role-playing with him, because unless he's talking about his character's gimmick. So before, when he was playing Inran, it was all about Inran thinking he was a god. And that was something that he could speak of at length with his character. But any other interaction was very shallow, just like, sure, okay, like one-word responses to the environment or people conversing with him, that kind of thing. Marfedalam is much the same, where unless he's talking about metal or dragons, he's very much a sure, okay type of a character, where he's very hard for me to play off of, because a big part of me DMing is improv, and I need people who are willing to give me material, give me reactions, give me something to capitalize on, to play off of, and Dubis just doesn't do that very well, and that's not entirely his fault. It's whatever, because these things will just happen. No player will ever be perfect. But that portion of the session, I think, is what made it very awkward for me, and what made me feel like it was a bad session, even though I think it overall was a good session. Because even Dubis said post-session that, yeah, he enjoyed the session. Even though I felt I was failing him, he didn't feel like I failed him, which makes me feel good, but at the same time, it still feels weird to me. So Kav continues with Trudy and Tem to the hamlet of Ross, and they arrive, and it's late at night. Well, they don't arrive yet. I'm sorry, I skipped a thing. There's a thing with mists and laughter in the back of their mind, and a flayed pig, but it was very much like glossed over, where like Dubis made light of it. It's like, yeah, it's whatever. These things happen. And then NPCs, like, I was very much keen to, like, discuss the experience with him, but there really wasn't anything to play off of there, so it got awkward, and I'm like, alright, let's just move on instead. So they arrive at the hamlet of Ross, and I wish I could have done a better job introducing Darren Reens, the dragon folk who is in charge of the Dawn Scales. But again, there wasn't a whole lot I could play off of with Dubis, and so I instead opted to try and play off from Dubis if he wanted to, but at the very least I figured let's make this scene matter. We'll drop some lore. We'll drop a little bit of lore, and that the Dawn Scales have acquired enough funding that they are looking to build more or less a paladin fortress for their forces, potentially up there at Ross. That was one of the locations they were considering. And that came up as naturally as I could in conversation with Dubis's character in the morning. And then he asked Kavgum to go and fetch Trudy and get her to come talk to him because he has an assignment for her. Which I don't remember the details, but I remember that encounter was also a little bit awkward, and by then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna try and cut the session here, because it's been long enough, and I need to figure out a way to make this a little bit less awkward, and also I need to figure out where exactly Oakhand is, because that's where the assignment leads them, is to go and find Oakhand, and eventually they're going to want him to cast a spell for them. And I need to figure out what Oakhand wants, whether or not he can be bartered with. If he can't be bartered with, how are they going to force him to cast that spell? If they can't force him to cast that spell, who else in the area could cast the spell they're looking for? that kind of thing. So there's some mental gymnastics I need to go through for that part of the story, which is what I'm going to be doing later tonight. As for the other group, it's just as simple as finishing the rest of the dungeon. I hope that they do find the Lich and that they engage and roleplay with her, because I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very excited for how tomorrow's session is going to go. I really, really am. As much as I feel conflicted and I feel that this session, this campaign Diaries 4, was lackluster, at the same time, looking at it as a whole, no, it set up a lot of things. Like, it wasn't a failure at all, and I can understand how my players had fun. It's just something in the back of my mind that it just doesn't feel as good. And I don't know why. And it's not that I didn't have fun, I still had fun. I still had enough fun, and the DM as a role tends to be a more sacrificial role. The DM will not always have fun. The DM needs to learn to indulge in the player's fun, to find their fun, even though along the way he is not having that same type of tabletop fun that the players typically have, which is why I like playing more than I like DMing. But I've become a bit of a forever DM, and I can't complain too much because I still enjoy it well enough. I've learned to grow to love it. I think I've gotten very good at it, but still, I don't know. Maybe it's just that. Maybe it's just that this was a weird session to DM, and that that's all it is that's bothering the back of my mind. But who knows? Maybe I did make some crucial error that I'm just not seeing, but that my gut can sense. Who can say? But anywho, that's really it for this campaign diary. Tomorrow, because I delayed this so much, the next session of this campaign will be going live on twitch.tv/owl_roll. And we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna finish that dungeon. I will try and reunite Kav with the party. I need to figure out what Gareth is going to do with Sam, and if we have time, we'll start in on that bit of the plot. And I'm curious to see if any of the minions of Steadfast survive to report back to him. Because if they do report back to him, then depending on how events play out, there are certain things he can do in response. And if they don't report back to him, then there are other certain things he can do as response. So I think that I think this next session is going to be pretty big. Not lengthwise, but in terms of the things that happen in it. I'm excited. So, I'll stop rambling now. You have a good night.